Hey everybody, this is Alzrath, and welcome to another episode of Deck Breakdown. Today we're joined by the sounds of small town nature, because it's too nice not to have my windows open today. So hopefully it's not too much of a noise in the background. You'll probably just hear the occasional car and kid. Hopefully not colliding. Today, I was originally going to bring you a special episode this week, but due to editing, it's going to take a little longer than I thought, so look for it over the next couple weeks. It's going to be a little bit of a surprise. It's a slight deviation from my norm, and I think you might enjoy it. But anyway, today we're actually going to cover another Preybird deck that I've been playing a lot of lately. I have a fairly tweaked version now, which it's slightly different from his, but the original deck is still quite amazing. You might just want to adjust it slightly for your personal playstyle. It's about the only change that I can really say make a difference in this. The deck is Preybird's The Bride, which is a Gwenneth deck. It's a 1.5 deck originally, and it's still very viable today, although you may want to splice in a certain card to deal with the mages, which wasn't quite as important back when this was built, although it can still deal perfectly fine without it. It's a bow-based Gwen deck, which most good Gwen decks are. I'm going to put the deck list down below, and I'm going to just try approaching it from, let's look at the allies first. And I'm going by the newest version that he has posted up, the one in red text in the thread that you'll find down below. But I've made my adjustments, and I'll cover those at the end, because, yeah, trying this out, trying to get a good format for this. The deck is pretty much the way he has the newest list set up is you have, of course, Gwenneth. For allies, you have the Jasmine, 3 of them, 2 Lilies, 4 Tainted Oracles, 4 Priests of the Light, and 2 Aeon Stormcallers. This gives you a kind of a higher end curve for allies, which is fine with this deck. It works good with it, and that's because it's a mid-game deck. It is designed specifically for that. These allies are built, with all exception for Lily, are built around delaying the opponent as much as possible from turn 3 onward, which is a very important turn in most decks, because turn 3 is where most decks will start to establish board control by dropping out a Jasmine and delaying enemies, or dropping a Priest of Light and delaying shadow energy, or dropping a Tainted Oracle and just providing that extra draw for yourself. You kind of create a slowdown for them that slows down their tempo enough for you to get your basically teeth to bear. Lily is to, well, essentially recover your items, and Aeon is to just provide that field presence. If you need to rely on allies, he can protect your other guys. Now, as far as spell cards go, you have, for the most recent version, he has Fire Arrow listed. I'm going to come back to that in a little bit. He also has 2 times Retreat, which is almost a given to be added to almost any human deck right now, because allies are still very prevalent and very important, especially whenever it's human on human. You have Into the Forest for your basically self-protection, self-preservation tool. You have Leyline Nexus to deal with enemy items. You have 4 times Bad Santa, and you have 4 times Rapid Fire. The Bad Santa is important for digging for your weapons, and the Rapid Fire is essential to you dealing damage. You do not want to lose Rapid Fire. Sever Ties is your worst enemy with this deck. With your second worst enemy either being Leyline Nexus or Focus Prayer or item removal, basically, of your weapon. The weapons in this deck, you have 6. The original deck uses 4 times Soul Seekers and 2 times Golden Guitar. Now, I see why Golden Guitar was included in here. It's got a permanent durability. It lasts forever if you don't attack with it, unless the enemy just straight up destroys it. So it does provide that little bit of threat on the board. In my version of this, I do replace it with something, and hopefully the reason I give why won't offend anyone. I really do like Golden Guitar as an option as well. It just really depends on your personal play style. But yeah, in my version, I kind of tweaked stuff around. I ended up getting rid of the Aeons because I found myself sacrificing them a lot. They still are a very good card for this deck, but I decided to lean more towards another direction. And I also went up to 41 cards, which is a 2-card increase on this deck. Now, as far as my ally composition, the changes I made were, of course, the Aeons I removed. And I decided to increase the number of lilies, which is the item retrieval ally. Basically, whenever she comes out, she brings your weapon back to hand, the last weapon in your graveyard. And she is a 3/4, so she can stand up a little bit on the board. She is a little bit higher cost, so she's not going to be quite as cornerstone in preventing enemy allies and enemy players from coming to bear. But she still is there. It's a good enough reason to include her. Adding 2 more of her is basically where I used up the Aeon slots. Now, when we go down into spells, my spells are pretty much exactly the same. The only exception is English. Fail me. Great. The only exception is really the fire arrow. Now, in the original build for this, he lists 3 times fire arrow, poison arrow, or retreat. I actually was testing it out. I tested out using fire arrow, and I tested out using poison arrow. The retreat obviously is already into the deck, so I don't really need to think about that one. I thought about increasing it to 4, but this deck doesn't really benefit from it much because retreat's just a delay. But yeah, here's the reason for why I went with poison arrow instead of fire arrow. Yeah, fire arrow can help you get rid of things like sandworms, which is a real problem with this deck. And fire arrow it deals damage on whenever it lands, and it deals that burn damage each turn, so it can get rid of stuff faster. But I like the use of poison arrow because it'll basically disable the opponent, which means you can either finish it off with allies, you can finish it off with your bow, and you won't get countered during that, or you can basically disable it a turn and completely ignore it, which I do a lot. And I find it really beneficial to be able to ignore that ally for a turn and deal 8 damage to their hero instead of, say, do 2 damage to that ally and still have to deal with it attacking you that next turn. I use poison arrow kind of like how rogues use ankle breaker. Was forgetting the name of it for a second there. You'd think I'd know it with how much I play my lance deck. But yeah, that's pretty much why I put poison arrow in there. It's not to kill enemies, although if you get it in the first couple turns, it's perfectly fine for killing early game enemies or using it to help your other guys finish them off. I kept the Leyline Nexus in there because it's been proving very useful, especially against Ambers and, well, Warriors and Rogues in general. I use it a lot on. Now we're going to move on to the weapons. Soulseeker 4 times, obviously auto-include in any Gwen deck and almost any Hunter deck in general, although other Hunters benefit from the other bows much more than Soulseeker, so you'll have to really kind of test it out there for those builds. But on Gwen, Soulseeker is a given because she is able to pump that up so nicely. But my reason for switching out Golden Catar for Guardian's Oath. Some people may disagree with me on this one, but I'm going to read to you the key line from Guardian's Oath that made me choose it over Catar. Your hero has Defender. That is the one reason I chose Guardian's Oath. It is one of the few weapons that gives you that ability, and it serves as one of the best deterrents. If you have not gotten your rapid fire out, Guardian's Oath is, in my opinion, as good or better than Soulseeker to have out. It has the same +1 defense that, say, the Iron Dagger has. And it has 5 durability, so it'll last for a while, especially if you decide that you need to use Gwen's ability. I wouldn't recommend using her ability until you have 5 Shadow Energy, but that's more strategy during the game kind of issue, which whenever I'm able to record games again, I'm definitely going to be showing my variant of this deck off, because I think I think it is competitive with Preybird's version as well. It's a slightly different approach, and it does play differently. This one plays a little bit more. It can flip-flop between attack and defense. His plays much better if you just go full-on offense, unless you just don't get that draw. Mine, you can be kind of sheepish and do all right with. It's actually a very newbie-friendly deck, which is why if you're getting into Shadow Era, pick up a Hunter. It may be a little bit rough starting out just for the little bit getting your cards up together, and it is a slightly more expensive deck considering the 6 weapons in there. Their weapons in general are expensive, and so is armor. Now, there are things you can look at to add to this deck, and there's reasons why you would and you wouldn't. One thing was, well, maybe you want to lower the ally curve and look at Pewin. I tested it out, and I have to agree with the kind of result of his tweaking of the deck that Pewin just really doesn't do anything in this deck. Honestly, none of the 1 and 2 cost allies really do anything beneficial for this deck compared to the mid cost allies. Of course, the same can be said about the higher cost allies. I tried Alden in this deck. He didn't get much use. He just didn't. There's not enough allies there to really get some strength out of him. Tried Armored Sandworm. It worked okay. I was using it in place of my Aeons. But I find that the weapon retrieval of Lily is much more beneficial at the point where you'd be bringing the Armored Sandworm out. But it is definitely there. Some people argue for aimed shot, since we're moving past allies now, because I've already covered the main ones that you'd want to look at for this deck. Only other delay one would be Marshland Sentinel, and you don't want to be using up your shadow energy on that. If we move on to the spells, you have things like aimed shot, like I was about to say, which attaches to your weapon and increases its damage by 1. You'd think, oh, that would be a great inclusion for this. Unfortunately, your other slots are better taken up by defensive cards to help you get up to that point of being able to attack. By the time you get your bow out, you're doing 8 damage a turn for probably 2 or 3 turns in a row, depending on how late you're able to actually get it out. Even if you don't get your Soul Seeker out, you can still do 6 damage per turn with your Guardian's Oath on offense, and even more on defense, and most people, if you have a pumped Guardian's Oath, won't attack you unless they're sure their creature will survive that attack, because on defense that's 4 damage before their ally gets to attack at all. So yeah, aimed shot, it's kind of a hit or miss. I wouldn't include it in this deck. I wouldn't even bother teching it in. Of course, you still have the different arrow types. Flaming arrow is good, but I still prefer poison arrow for the reasons I stated. For some reason, I'm looking at my deck right now, and I have one too few into the forest compared to the original deck. I don't remember why I did that. It might be because I did tech in those Spell Eater bands and wanted to get reliability back up. And I don't use Into the Forest too often unless I am just not getting the cards I need. If we move on to the traps, which most of the other spell cards you don't want to even really bother with in this deck. Battle Plans is a maybe, as a one-off, but usually you don't get it when you need it, so I wouldn't bother. Death Trap and Net Trap, great for Vincent. Not great for Gwen. I'm sorry, but they just don't really come into play as much with Gwen, because Gwen can deal with the threats on the board, so you don't really need to delay them as much. Only thing you really have trouble with are rush decks, and you wouldn't have these cards out in time to use them usually. Net Trap is a turn 2 drop, but yeah, by turn 3 you're going to have Jasmine or Priest of the Light or something out, so you don't really need that. And Death Trap is turn 3, so they're already it's going to be their turn 4 before they get affected by Death Trap. Only thing really useful against is Sandworms and Aeon. Let's go ahead and keep moving on down the list of optional spells. You have Poor Quality, not really needed since you do have Leyline Nexus, and Leyline Nexus will deal with almost everything that's a problem for you. The only thing that it doesn't deal with is What Big Teeth. And right now in the meta, Wolven aren't that strong, so you don't really need to worry about it. And while Poor Quality would completely neutralize it, it just doesn't, it's not worth including in for that small niche effect. If anything, I would throw in a Shrine of Negatia before I'd throw in Poor Quality. Because Shrine of Negatia can clear up the field a little bit for you if someone's dropping a bunch of rain delays or lay lows or similar cards. Sever Ties, I'm kind of hit or miss on. I personally don't see a need for it in this deck. It's a great card against this deck, but yeah. If you move on to Master Smith versus Lily is a bit of a thought on my part, because I tried it out in a little bit and I found that without that ally presence there to force them to attack and waste some of their resources, it didn't really do much. It wasn't as useful. And they're both 4 cost. The only difference is Master Smith lets you choose which one you bring back, whereas Lily gives you board presence and brings it back. That's why I prefer Lily for human decks. The only reason I use Master Smith in shadow decks is because Lily's not available. Now, one big point, if we move on from the spells, because you obviously already have your card draw out with the Bad Santa and the Tainted Oracles, which provide you more than enough draw in this deck. But whenever you move on to the armors and stuff, one of the things was, why not Wrath of the Forest? My reason for this is there's just simply not enough allies in this deck to justify it. At most, you're probably going to have 1 or 2 allies on the field at any given time, and they're mostly there just to bait the opponent into attacking them instead of you, just long enough for you to deal damage. So Wrath of the Forest, slightly pointless. The only reason I spec in Spell Eater bans is because there's so many mages. Spell Eater bans are really expensive, and if I'm not facing a major Zaladar, I sacrifice that right off the bat. Some people would think, oh, add Crimson's Vest so it works with Soul Seeker, or even with Guardian's Oath whenever you kill off the enemy. Honestly, it's not worth the cost, if that makes sense. Yeah, it heals 2 damage whenever you kill, whenever an opposing ally is killed, period. And that can be helpful, but there's just not room for it, and its benefit is not great enough to justify ditching one of your other cards. This deck is solid enough without it that in most matchups it's going to survive, and it's really good, and it'll work up into the late 200s, low 300s, even in the current meta. So definitely a plus there. Moving on to, well, there is the option of Moonlight Bracers. I was tempted not to cover that one. I'm still on the fence as to whether it would be beneficial or not. With her ability to boost her weapon's durability, Moonlight Bracers, not as great, but she does burn through that durability, especially fast. So Moonlight Bracers is an option. I just couldn't find room for it to justify it, and since it's turn 3, yeah, you can play it early to protect yourself a little bit, but again, you have better options for cards because your threat is not going to be enemy allies. Enemy allies are your food with this deck, and those are what keep you alive. Hence, if you're facing this deck, just a little tip, go for direct damage or things that you can land without bringing an ally out, and this deck tends to feel a little bit more pain from that. Unless they have Spell Eater bans out, which, is one of the other reasons why I include it. Mages were giving me too much trouble. If we move on to the weapons, I mentioned Iron Dagger, and it's +1 damage when it defends. It is a turn 3 drop, which means it is an option as an alternative to Guardian's Oath. Reason I don't like it is you need the bigger weapons. You need the powerhouses to actually make this deck go any real distance, and Old Iron Dagger sadly only has 2 durability, even with her ability to boost stuff, you don't want to be wasting your ability that early on a weapon you are not planning to keep. So I move on to Guardian's Oath as my alternative. I can survive till turn 5, regardless of who I'm against, without much problem, and Guardian's Oath gives me that little more staying power if I don't have Rapid Fire or a Soul Seeker. Golden Katar. It's in the original deck. It has 2 attack, it doesn't lose durability when it defends, only has 2 durability itself. It will stick around forever, and it is a good card, and I definitely recommend trying it first before trying Guardian's Oath. And it is a bit more newbie friendly, in my opinion, if you know when to attack and when not to attack. But Guardian's Oath provides you a little bit more threat should the enemy want to attack you with allies, or even attack you with themselves. It prevents, if you're both at low life, the Guardian's Oath has the advantage of, hey, they think, if I attack them, I'm going to take 4 damage before my attack even comes through. If they only have 4 life, they're not going to attack you with their weapon. And one of the advantages is Gwenneth is usually going to pound you down pretty low. So, regardless of what kind of deck you're playing. So that's why I like Guardian's Oath over Katar. Both really good cards. Both worth trying. Pick the one that goes with your style. Needless to say, we have to mention Beetle Demon Bow. I only like Beetle Demon Bow on Shadow allies. I don't know why. I'm on Shadow heroes. And I don't know why. It just doesn't seem to fit with any of the other decks. Victor can use it, but I find things like Guardian's Oath better than it. There's plenty of human allies that do perfectly fine. And yeah, it is a 3/5 for 4 resources, and you can attack with it that turn. I just don't see it as quite as useful. It's one of those middle of the road cards that is better in a control deck, in my opinion. But overall, this deck is good. Oh, I forgot to cover one of the spells. I was just browsing through the cards and looked at it, and Surprise Attack. It's a draw card, and I feel like mentioning it just because I'm probably not going to get to another Hunter within the next few weeks, and it's worth bringing this card up to people's attention just as a kind of bonus content on this. I feel like talking about this card. Surprise Attack is underestimated, in my opinion. I mean, it's used, but major decks tend not to have it because it's an attachment. Attachments are easily dealt with in this current release, and people look down on them. Surprise Attack, if you attach it to a Sandworm or attach it to something hiding behind an Aeon, is actually very potent. It gives you that extra reliable draw engine, and heck, if you have more than one of them out, you're going to be outdrawing anybody, because that ambush keeps your ally from being countered, which is extremely powerful. And I'm considering trying to make a Victor deck that uses this to a slight advantage. I'm going to see if I can get it to work out. Combo decks aren't as strong because the card pool is small right now. Whenever it gets bigger, you'll see combo decks making a bit more of a surge as the card pool increases and the options for combos increase, because they'll start to counter all these rush Elodwins and, well, not really the rush decks. The rush decks tend to beat the combo decks. The combo decks tend to beat the big house decks and all this other stuff. Burn decks. But we'll get into that kind of stuff in a strategy discussion. I probably even just misquoted it. I don't have those notes in front of me right now. But yeah. That has been another episode of Deck Breakdown. I hope it made sense, because I'm kind of making this on the fly. I was planning a different episode for this week, as I said. So, yeah. That's the Gwen deck from Preybird. I think I've featured 2 of his decks this month now. I'll have to move on to other deck builders. Although his decks are exceptionally good. So are Feudaliles and several other ASF ETC members are extremely good deck builders too. I'd have to ask them if I can share some of their private decks. The contest for Terra Dune is coming to a close probably... I don't know if this is going to release on the 19th or the 20th. Probably within the next 24 hours of this being released. It finishes up on the 20th. As long as it's the 20th somewhere in the world, you can submit a deck. That's where I'm going with it. I'm not going to be too strict on that. I understand for the next contest, I'm going to be adjusting the submission requirements, make it a little bit easier for people to submit. And I'm also going to be going for something a little more new player friendly. This is something that, if you look at the analytics, most people won't hear on this because they skip over the end. But yeah, the next contest will be a little bit more newbie friendly. It'll be with a goal of trying to get shadow crystals to people who really need them, who don't have the cards to build the decks they see in my deck breakdown. I may also do some things regarding other TCGs online, so yeah. Anyway, I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode. I will see you guys next time on Deck Breakdown or any of my other series. Be sure to like, subscribe, comment below. If you'd like to see a certain hero come up soon, comment below. I'll consider it. I still don't do great with priest decks, but I am looking at them. I'm trying to figure out ones that I like. Yeah, Zana is very popular and Zana is very good, but I don't like Zana. I haven't found a deck with her that I like. Let's put it that way. She's too slow feeling. I prefer my decks to be fast and efficient rather than slow and strenuous. But yeah. Anyway, keep gaming, have fun. This has been Alzarath. Peace out.